Good morning and good afternoon. Welcome to the second energy seminar of the fall quarter 2016. We don't have any exciting news today, but we do have an exciting panel discussion today. For those of you who were here last week, you probably remember all the excitement we had last week with babies coming and Sunny threatening people into giving talks and so on. So today we're in for a real treat. I'd like to first introduce the moderators for today's panel. Professor Stacey Bent, world-class electrochemical, electrophysical researcher, solar cells, as one specialty, professor of chemical engineering, director of the Tomcats Center, and as of last week or something, my new associate dean in the School of Engineering here. And her sidekick at the Tomcats Center, if I can call him that, Bartholomeusz, who's the director of innovation. So I'm really excited to have them convene a panel on the innovation transfer that's been a very interesting and exciting part of the Tomcats Center experience. Stacey.
Okay, thank you. I'm actually going to do the second introduction, and I'm going to tell you just a little bit about the Tomcats Center before I hand it over to Bartholomeusz, who's going to moderate the panel that we have. So Tomcats Center has been here at Stanford since 2009. It was established with a gift from Tom Steyer and Kat Taylor, hence the name TomKat. Get that question a lot. You notice we have a sister organization here at Stanford, which is the last names, the Steyer-Taylor Center, focusing on energy policy and finance. So that's we work with them. But basically, we focus on research, education, outreach, and innovation transfer and sustainable energy. We also are very interested in the intersection between energy and food, water, climate, and health. So some of the programs that we have and the grants that we fund are related to those topics. We do a lot of different things. This is a partial list of the types of activities that we have at the Tomcats Center. We give out a fair amount of funding in the form of research seed grants. We also just this year started a TomKat postdoctoral fellowship program. So we bring in postdocs to do research in these areas of sustainable energy. We have several things related to, directly related to student programs. Energy Catalyst grants are ones where instructors of classes can ask for funding to add an energy component into their class. Last year, we started our first program on women entrepreneurs and sustainability, and we hope to continue that this year. We have TomKat Energy Impact Fellowships for undergraduates. We have a lot of internships. This is a booming program for undergraduates and co-term students in energy startups over the summer. We started last year a new Sustainable Energy Innovation Prize with StartX. And if you are interested in careers in sustainable energy, which I imagine a number of you are, if you go to our website, we have a very nice page where we have lots of good information on careers in sustainable energy companies. What you're going to hear about today is our Innovation Transfer Program, and this is led by Bartholomeusz, the Executive Director, so I'll just give you a very brief introduction to it. The goal is to help commercialize Stanford energy innovation. So we provide some funding, some training, some mentorship, and the goal is to produce experienced entrepreneurial leaders in sustainable energy. And so if you look at what we've done over the last few years since we started this program, fall 2013, we've given out now about $2 million, 26 different teams. These are teams that have a faculty mentor, but they're typically groups of students, staff, postdocs. They can be undergraduate, graduate. You'll see that in a moment, the breakdown. These teams have been very resourceful, very successful in bringing in additional funds. They've raised now over $35 million in external follow-on funding. You can see a lot of these are coming from different government-based awards. Some of them are private funding as well. One of the teams already has been acquired, and 8 have turned into revenue-generating companies. So we're very excited about the program. The breakdown in topics is shown here. You see we cover everything from energy generation and conversion down to the nexus, as I mentioned, between energy, food, water, and environment. We have some on energy efficiency and storage, transmission, and management. At least as interesting as where the teams are coming from. So if you look at the students, the founding teams come from all levels all the way from bachelor's to postdoc, staff, MBA, master students, PhD. You can see that here. And they come from 5 different schools at Stanford University. The vast majority is coming from engineering, but we also have quite a big contribution from folks from the business school, and you see contributions from 3 other schools as well. And we're always welcoming of other participants to submit competitive proposals to us. So enough about the TomCats Center itself. Let me just mention you're going to be hearing, you've just heard from me, you're going to hear from Brian Bartholomeusz. If you get involved in anything in the TomCats Center, you almost certainly will interact with Donica Sarlia, who's here, right here. She can wave her hand. And Ryan Haas is our newest member. He's here as well. There he is, way in the back. So our offices are in the Shriram building. Anything you're interested in, want to learn about things, if you can't find the information on the website, come see any one of us. So with that, let me hand it over to Brian Bartholomeusz, who's going to moderate today's panel.
Thank you, Stacey. So we had a minor emergency. It wasn't as bad as last week. One of our speakers can't make it today, but we're all in safe hands with the two we have. Now, if you were here last Monday and listened to Arun Majumdar's talk, he actually did a really great job of setting the stage for today's discussion. Specifically, his comments about the pivotal role that universities play in innovating the solutions that are going to be required to address the energy and environmental challenges we're going to have. He also talked about the critical need for a supportive ecosystem to help these innovations actually gain a foothold out in the market and to scale, to have an impact. So today, 2 of the 2 speakers we have, 2 recent Stanford graduates, are going to talk about their journeys, along the lines of what Arun was talking about. Prior to turning the floor over to them, I thought it would behoove us to take a quick tour through Stanford's impact, entrepreneurial impact locally. This has a big it sets the stage and places a little bit of context around what's going to follow. So in 2012, Chuck Easley and Bill Miller published a very interesting paper quantifying Stanford's entrepreneurial impact in California. And if you look at the results, they're pretty impressive by any measure, pretty darn impressive. But one of the most salient features here was the finding that about 40% of the companies founded by Stanford graduates are located within an hour of the university. So this has contributed to this tremendously dense concentration of talent, of experience, of expertise, of resources, and also retained tribal lore in terms of how you actually go about starting and scaling companies. This has turned out to be the driving force for the success of many industries that have been spawned here in the Valley. And certainly it's sort of a model and a set of parameters that set the Bay Area and Silicon Valley specifically apart as this unique and very effective innovation factory, if you will. So if you look at the point that Arun made in terms of us needing this kind of ecosystem to exist for clean tech, or companies formerly known as clean tech, to survive, to prosper, to grow, you really need to have this kind of ecosystem in that space as well. And this is just a partial list of companies that you could consider clean tech that are in the area that were formed by Stanford graduates or have very close links to Stanford. The ones that have come out of the TomKat program are listed up at the top. And today we have Bryce Meredig, the founder of Citrine Informatics, and Nikolas Flanders, the founder, or both of them co-founder of Opus 12, here to talk to us, to tell us what they do, how they got started, who they are, and what their journeys have been so far. So what we'll do is have them give a brief introduction about themselves and their companies, after which I will ask them each a few questions to get things going, and then turn it over to the audience for your questions to them. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Bryce.
Great. Thanks, Brian, and everyone else involved for the opportunity to be here today. It's great to be back at Stanford. I am a 2X Stanford alum, BAS 07, MBA 14. I'm one of the founders and the chief science officer of Citrine Informatics. I'm also an adjunct professor of materials science here, so just curious to get a show of hands. Any materials majors or PhDs? A few. Good. It's energy. There should be. That's great. Just wanted to give you a kind of an overview of what we are, what Citrine is, and my own and our journey to get to where we are. Citrine's vision is to use data and machine learning to completely revolutionize the way that physical products are designed and made. And we do this from the level of the materials that go into them, the materials and chemistries that go into them, all the way up to how should we make these new products at scale in a factory environment. And therefore, it's probably not surprising for you to hear that there's a strong tradition of material science expertise at our company. So at least there are 3 founders, and all of us kind of have dual backgrounds in software and machine learning and material science and chemistry. And we founded the company. I actually met one of my co-founders at the business school, and the other I met while I was doing my doctoral work at Northwestern. My co-founder, Greg Mulholland, from the business school here, we got to know each other because, as you can imagine, there's not a huge number of people or a huge number of material scientists in each class at the GSB. So we got put together pretty quickly. My background had been in computational modeling of energy materials, actually, and I was mostly focused on atomistic modeling. So it was quite theoretical. But I had started getting interested in method development. So once we say, okay, we have these computational tools, these physics-based models for understanding materials, I started asking questions like, what can we do kind of as wrappers around those tools? And one of the wrappers that I got very, very excited about was machine learning. So I was asking questions like, can we train machine learning to basically to capture quantum mechanics if we give it enough examples of how atoms interact? And Greg came to the business school having spent a few years in the semiconductor industry, and he was the guy rolling up his sleeves, running a reactor to try to grow gallium nitride. And what he said was, at his company, they had over 100 control points on this reactor. They generated a huge amount of data, and the struggle that he and his team faced every single day was, how do we harness all the data we're generating to get better gallium nitride out at the end of the day? And I said, that was, I told Greg, I said that was a big area of my research interest was, designing algorithms that can tune the inputs that we have for materials problems to get the outputs that we want. And of course, there's a lot of work that has to be done, and going from things that work on an academic scale or a lab scale to productizing it, and that's what we're still working on at Citrine today. But that was sort of the genesis of the company. It was actually a true Silicon Valley story. We had lunch down in Cupertino at an Islands Burger. I always think of it fondly every time I'm there. And we started writing down ideas on a napkin around how can we use data and machine learning to solve these very applied materials design and production problems that are across all industries, but in particular energy. And I want to say just a bit about our business model as well. So we sell a commercial software as a service platform to large manufacturing companies who want to turn the data that they generate about their products and about the materials that go into their products into insights or faster R&D, more efficient manufacturing, and so forth. But a big part of my job as the chief scientist is engaging with universities and government labs. And we work with many of these organizations actually in sort of a non-paid, non-commercial capacity where these communities provide data and expertise to our platform, and we provide access to a huge amount of data and state-of-the-art machine learning tools that can help them in their research. So we found this to be a very nice way to create a business model that allows us to generate a lot of revenue, but not charge the academic and national lab communities for what we do, and to partner with them in other ways. And a bit of information about where we are today. So Brian mentioned that the TomKat companies are generating revenue. We are one of them. So we have a few sort of global 1,000 customers, including companies like Panasonic and Hyundai, and a few others that are Fortune 500s that I'm unfortunately not allowed to tell you. But we're spanning across a lot of different industries. Many of these problems are energy problems, not all, but many are energy problems. We also have a fair amount of grant funding from the Department of Energy because so often energy problems are materials and manufacturing problems at their heart. We have raised a couple rounds of venture capital. We raised a seed round in kind of fall 2014, and we closed our Series A earlier this year. And we're up to a team of about 14 people with a couple more starting in the next few weeks. So it's starting to feel like a real business, which is pretty cool given our humble beginnings. And I guess I also made a note here to talk a little bit more about our connections to energy, since this is the energy seminar. So as maybe you gathered, or as I alluded to, we didn't start Citrine to be a quote-unquote energy company. There are, of course, companies that do this, but we recognized from day one that Citrine could play an incredibly important role in helping to solve energy problems, especially around, again, materials and manufacturing. So just to give you a quick sampling, our platform has been used in production to help solve problems in thermoelectric materials research, solar research, catalysis, general manufacturing sort of energy intensity. There's a huge number of application areas, and many more are emerging every day. And often, encouragingly, these are coming out of industry. So we get funding, of course, from the government, but we have commercial customers, global 1,000s, coming to Citrine saying, we want to be more efficient, we want to be greener. Green chemistry is another big area. We get a lot of inbound around that. You know, how can we maintain or increase product performance and reduce the environmental impact of what we do? Nike has an entire platform and sort of web presence dedicated to green chemistry. So that gives you a sense of you know, this is a real industrial priority now, and Citrine's proud to be a part of helping to make these greener and more sustainable solutions, better energy materials, a reality more quickly, because I think we would all agree that's something important to be doing. And lastly, I wanted to acknowledge Brian and Danica and Stacey and the TomKat team. Obviously, we are a TomKat company, and I always like to say they were our first supporters, in the sense that, you know, before we had any venture investment, before we had any federal grants, you know, they listened to our vision and believed in it and supported us, and they funded us to do a project with Professor Jens Norskov's group here at Stanford, and that's a group that both the people currently in it as well as alumni of that group that we continue to interact with very closely. So, you know, one thing I learned here at Stanford in entrepreneurship, I took Launchpad in the design school, which is outstanding. And one of the lessons that sticks with me is that risk goes down in chunks as a startup. It's not true that, you know, every day you incrementally make your company better. It's most days you're not any better off, and then some days something really important happens. You ship a product, you land a customer, you get funding, and you sort of experience this step function improvement in where you are in the value of your company, and risk goes down in that chunk. One of those instrumental moments was when TomKat backed us, when somebody said there's a there. And I think that was just, you know, absolutely instrumental for us. We've engaged with the TomKat program in numerous other ways. So at TomKat, you heard Stacey mention the TomKat intern program. We now have one of our TomKat interns who is a full-time employee with us. So we had her as an intern, and she was outstanding. So now she's full-time. And of course, we come back for things like this. It's, you know, you're busy as entrepreneurs, of course. We're all busy, but we always have time to give back to the TomKat community because it's been so instrumental in helping us get to where we are. So thanks. I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me on the panel, and looking forward to the discussion later.
Great. Does this work? Oh, it does. All right. Great. So I'm Nikolas Flanders. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Opus 12. And I'll pick up where you left off on green chemistry, because that's what we're doing. We've developed technology that can actually convert CO2 into higher value products. So what I'll do is I'll just kind of go through an overview of the company and then go through kind of how we actually started. So even just walking around campus today, you've probably already seen a couple of Teslas. And that's just the tip of the iceberg of this trend of the electrification of everything. That's this inexorable trend away from combustion and mechanical-based systems and over to electric ones. You know, they just work better and increasingly they're cheaper, and this whole trend is underpinned by, of course, a transition in the grid towards lower cost renewables. But one major energy consuming sector that's noticeably absent from this trend is the chemical space. We're still making chemicals in more or less the same way we have for the last 100 years. And so at the highest level, what we think of Opus 12 as is a new platform for electrifying the chemical sector. And so the way we've done that is by building a device that takes three inputs: CO2, water, and electricity. And then it uses new catalysts and electricity to break apart the CO2 and water and recombine the elements into new molecules. So on one side of the reactor, you get an output of pure oxygen, and then on the other side, you get a new carbon-based product, and you can use different catalysts to make different products. So I guess one thing I should mention too is the way we've done this, one of our core innovations is we've figured out a way to upgrade, basically convert an existing technology to do this. So we've taken something that's been around for 50 years, it's always been used to do one process, and we've modified an internal component so that it can split CO2. So that really reduces our scale-up risk, and it's a pretty powerful upgrade. So basically at commercial scale, one unit, one module of our technology would have the CO2 conversion capacity of 37,000 trees, but in the volume of a suitcase. So it's like 64 football fields of forest crammed into your luggage. We've where we are now, we've attracted both non-dilutive grant funding, and we are actually just at the tail end of our seed round. So it's interesting, this space of CO2 conversion. It's really just emerging as a point of interest across multiple government agencies. So we've actually gotten funding from the DOE, but also National Science Foundation and even NASA. And I'll get into some of the space applications of this as well. And of course, our very first funding and our very first believers were the Tomcats Center. So kind of in a similar way, we always say, when Brian calls, we come. It's really been great to have them as a champion from the very beginning. So in addition to the grant funding, we've also started some commercial partnerships, one with Shell through their Game Changer program. And then we have a manufacturing partner based in Connecticut. They make that hardware that we're modifying, and they're called Proton Onsite. And then we've also, one thing that's helped us move quickly is we've leveraged a lot of the accelerator ecosystem that's here in Silicon Valley. So our home base now is actually at Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, so just across the bay. There's a new program called Cyclotron Road there. And it's been really helpful for us. Basically, someone at the Department of Energy looked around and they said, look, here's Silicon Valley. There's all these amazing startups, but most of them you can start with just a laptop and a couch. But what about a hard science energy entrepreneur who needs a lot more infrastructure? Well, we have these 17 national labs across the US, and one of them is smack dab in Silicon Valley. What if we gave a handful of those clean energy entrepreneurs free access to the lab space for 2 years and saw what they would come up with? So we were Opus 12 was part of the first cohort of 6 teams that got picked to come into Cyclotron Road. And so now, a year and a half later, we've built a prototype, which I brought today. I can show you after class if you're interested. And we're now kind of getting ready to scale up to our first commercial product, which will launch next year. We also are just starting breakout labs. So that's an interesting one. It's through the Peter Thiel empire. They kind of invest in early stage science-based startups. StartX we've done. The Molecular Foundry is where we actually build our catalysts. That's also located at Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. And also Echoing Green is actually a different one we've taken advantage of, which is an East Coast-based program for kind of impact entrepreneurs, social entrepreneurs. It can be in climate change or other areas. So that's really the foundation that we're building upon. How we started, so my 2 co-founders, Itasha and Kendra, were both in the Jaramillo group here in the Department of Chemical Engineering, which is basically the world's leading group for CO2 electrocatalysis. And kind of during their time working and studying these catalysts, they saw a lot of breakthroughs. So actually in 2012, they published a paper showing that you could turn CO2 into 16 different products. And many of these are some of the world's most important commodity chemicals, things like ethylene for making plastics, or syngas, which can be upgraded into a wide number of products. And so really what they saw, though, was there was a lot of breakthroughs in the catalyst research, and that's what the academic community was focused on. But the real gap for making something economic was in the reactor, the actual environment where this reaction occurs. So we formed Opus 12 to build the ultimate box for CO2 conversion. And we make some of our own catalysts, but the vision is that if someone else in some other group comes up with a great, CO2 to propylene catalyst, we want to have the ultimate home for that reaction to occur. So I guess just real quick, the way we met, I originally met Itasha at the Stanford Student Space Initiative, the Space Club, first annual meeting. And it's kind of come full circle with the NASA funding. And then we had we really started talking about the work she was doing. Actually, on a Saturday, one of my classmates at GSB, I did MBA and then the MSc IPER joint degree. We did kind of like a clean tech meetup of PhD students and MBA students interested in energy and materials. My previous work, I had been early on at another startup, and before that I'd worked at McKinsey in their clean tech practice. And I remember we did this big report about the future of energy and materials and food and land and kind of how they're all becoming interrelated. And we did a lot of work looking at carbon capture and storage. And I was always wondering, what is the economic driver for actually doing that storage other than enhanced oil recovery? And so when I talked to Itasha, she was talking about this new technology that you could, hey, why don't you upgrade it into something that's worth more? That was a thought I'd never thought before. And so we spent our first summer doing a techno-economic analysis. So basically looking at if we could get this to work with reasonable assumptions, would it be economically viable? And the answer to that looked really promising. And at the time, then the applications for cyclotron road came out, and then kind of the rest is history. So here's a picture of the technology that we're upgrading to split CO2. It's a proton exchange membrane water electrolyzer, a PEM water electrolyzer. These things have been around for 50 years. They're used to split water into hydrogen and oxygen at a really high level of energy efficiency and really high power density. And what we've done is we've modified the membrane so that instead of just feeding water in, we can feed CO2 in, and then take advantage of all of those decades of commercial refinement to split CO2. And so this picture, this is a megawatt scale system. They're really cool. They can ramp up and down in milliseconds to power fluctuations, so you can bolt them directly into a wind turbine or a solar panel. And so our vision is to take advantage of all of that, but then be using it to make products beyond just hydrogen, these new carbon-based compounds. So that analogy I started with at the beginning, the electrification of everything, we see it as going one level deeper. In the same way that whether it's a drivetrain in your Tesla or a locomotive or kind of an assembly robot, it's actually the same electric motor, just at different sizes. And you kind of get this rationalization of all these different processes in a single type of hardware. We think we can do the same thing for chemicals production. Right now, to make ethylene or carbon monoxide, it's a very different looking chemicals plant. But with our platform, the idea is it'd be kind of the same box, just different sizes, and the only thing that would change would be these catalysts. So we see ourselves sitting at really the intersection of three converging trends. One is, and Bryce, you alluded to this, there really is in industry an appetite for moving towards cleaner materials. It has to be cost competitive. You don't get a green premium, but if given the choice between one product that's green and one that isn't, they will leap at it. And it's been really interesting to kind of start seeing some of that inbound interest towards us for companies looking to clean up their materials. Even things like Disney looking to make their plastic toys greener. It's stuff you don't even expect to come through. So that's one trend. The other one being, increasing demand for the materials we can make from CO2, and then finally increasing penetration of low-cost renewables, and really we can bring those all together. So just quickly on Mars, if you may or may not know, the atmosphere is 95% CO2, and now they found some water up there. So we have all the ingredients we would need to make new materials. And one of the biggest challenges with a Mars mission is launching all the material that you would need for a colony from Earth to Mars. So what if you could just synthesize the materials there in situ? And so that's what we're actually doing some work for NASA on, is we could turn the atmosphere into 3D printable plastics. So anyway, started at the space, we met originally at the Space Club, and it comes full circle. Yeah, and then we've also taken advantage of the TomKat intern program. In the last 14 months, we've had two interns who we've been really happy with. So I encourage you to apply to that.
Great, thank you very much. So, I have a few questions for the speakers, and then I'll turn it over to you. So, Bryce, let me start off with you. So, if you work with a company like Tesla, for example, I think it'll probably be no secret to anybody what you're probably working on. How do you then work with, say, another battery company or another car company? How do your clients manage this with you in terms of the possible leakage of IP, or maybe they don't want the other people to have the same advantages they had?
Yeah, so what customers are looking for from us is the software and the capabilities. And it is true that there's sort of an onboarding process that Citrine engineers will help the customer with, but it's pretty clear. I mean, we have state-of-the-art security. When a customer signs up, they get a private deployment. All their data stay exclusive to them, and we kind of only see what they want us to see. And customers vary by how how protective they are of their proprietary data. I mean, everyone of course values it tremendously, but oftentimes we don't have an exact idea of even what our customers are exactly using our platform to do. So they will keep us in the dark. We're on a need-to-know basis just like everybody else, I guess. But we've seen a pretty wide variety of attitudes among customers or potential customers around data and information, ranging from we should be companies in our industry should be pooling data into these sort of large anonymous data silos that we can all harness without kind of showing our hands to each other. To I want a lockdown instance that no one else will ever be able to see, including Citrine. So it varies a lot depending on the company, but we can accommodate across that spectrum.
Nikolas, so your company on the one hand could be construed to be a classic clean tech company, but on the other hand, you could position yourself as a chemical company. Given the sort of well-publicized reticence of the investment community, what is your reception when you go out and talk to them? How do you position yourself, and how do you present what your company does? Because there's a huge energy/environmental impact to what you do, but do you position yourself, or do you put on some other garb when you go talk to them?
Yeah, I think the way I just presented it is pretty much the narrative that I'm telling, but you notice that I led with, here's this trend of the electrification of everything, and that's how we fit into that. Kind of everybody gets on that. I think you're right. There is a lot of reticence if you come in saying, hey, I'm a clean tech company. So I think it's important to figure out a way to tell your story in a way that's, I don't want to say less scary, but at least shows shows an intention and a careful thought around how this is going to become a profitable business on its own, separate from any. I think what investors don't want is something that, I think they're scared of two things. One is it's something that's going to rely completely on policy or carbon tax. And two is, and this is largely due to kind of some of the boom and bust from earlier in the 2000s, they don't want something that's going to require like a $200 million demo plant to see whether or not it'll work. That was a thing back in the day, and that won't happen anymore. So you have to figure out a way that you're going to go to market and avoid that. So I think of it, there's kind of like been three waves of clean tech, innovation and investment. And the first wave was like kind of in the 90s, I guess. There were really new hardware innovations that did come to fruition and some cool acquisitions and IPOs. Then there was kind of this period of like in conjunction with like the biofuels boom and a lot of pretty spectacular failures. That was kind of wave two. And now clean tech investment is down 80% since that peak. But I call that clean tech 3.0, and I actually think it's okay because the folks who are left in the rubble are actually investors who are very serious and are going to give careful thought to this and actually be able to help the entrepreneurs scale in an appropriate way. And then on the other side, it's entrepreneurs who I think are thinking carefully about how to get their technology to market without needing tremendous capital investment, because that just didn't work. It didn't fit the model.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, even though I have to say I love the line you have, the carbon capture potential of 37,000 trees in a suitcase. I think that's fabulous. Bryce, I have a question for you in terms of deploying your product in other countries. It sounds to me that there's got to be probably quite a bit of customization in terms of the input and output. How do you plan to handle that, or how are you handling that?
Yeah, so we do have customers internationally already in Korea and Japan and a few different places in the United States. Obviously the I guess you could think about customization or sort of personalization on two levels. One is just localization in language and so forth, which frankly we have a lot of work to do around. We benefit from the fact that in most places, well, I guess maybe this isn't completely fair to say. At many companies, English along with the local language is important for the scientific and technical discourse. So it's not a showstopper if your product's in English, I guess, or that's the experience we've had. The other maybe more interesting question, getting back to the investment point, which you could ask of a company like ours is, well, if your platform is being used to help solve problems around batteries and alloys and catalysis and all these other areas, how much customization do you have to do in each of those areas? And for us, we've taken pains to make sure that all the machinery under the hood, how we ingest data from research papers, existing databases, things like this, that's pretty consistent across different areas. The machine learning cranks that we're turning are pretty consistent across different areas. And where we customize, at least in a templated way, is with the interface, how we present information and results to customers, because people in different fields of materials and manufacturing and chemistry speak different languages in the sense of, different technical languages. So the way a metallurgist prefers to consume his or her data and analytical insights is different than the way a chemical engineer would want to see maybe similar, what to us is similar information. So we build these sort of graphical templates that will where we can roll out our platform in thematically similar areas without having to re-architect the platform under the hood. That would be the expensive part. But it feels domain customized to the customer, and they like that. So we found a happy medium there.
One more question for Nikolas. How important do you think patents are for your business? I was very interested to hear your comment about the fact that you would create this kind of flexible platform where other people could plug in their technology. Do you see any need for very strong IP protection, or do you consider that to be a risk?
Yes. It's definitely a core part of our business is kind of developing a core IP. Now we could have something that someone else could plug into, but the thing they're plugging into is what we're protecting, and kind of all variants of that. We want to make sure we're protecting. We're also finding, though, it's an interesting balance between kind of what you patent and what you keep as a trade secret, and we're finding kind of in actually making the product and tweaking it, we're seeing there's a lot of just like the way we make the membrane. It's kind of, the analogy I use is, even if I tell you kind of the properties of the ingredients of the Coca-Cola recipe, you're not going to know like how long I stirred it for, like did I shave the vanilla or like chop it up. So there's a lot of elements there that we're finding actually have a really important impact even at the nanoscale, and so we kind of keep those in-house while patenting the things that we think are going to allow us to maintain operations, kind of protect our ability to practice.
Excellent. I think we'll turn it over to the audience for some questions now. So, okay, Sally.
Sorry, I can't resist. So one of my favorite talks that I heard around Stanford was a talk that Dick Swanson gave several years ago about the startup of SunPower, and basically his story was about a bunch of pivots, that critical pivots that he'd made. And actually, I've watched both of your projects from really the very beginning, even actually before they existed, and I'm kind of sensing some pivots, and I'm wondering if you could articulate that, because I think that the ability to be flexible and sort of sense the opportunities is so important to your success. So if you're willing to share, I'd love to hear that.
Who wants to go first?
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and we're constantly, we're finding ways big and small. I think largely driven by the market. I mean, by our customers and our users. You have to be listening. It's one thing to have a vision. You got to have a vision, but at the end of the day, if they're not interested in what we're offering, what we're selling, then we're not going to last for very long. So If I were to look across the history of our company, the general vision of sort of materials and chemistry plus data has been there since day one. So there's thematic consistency there. What I think has changed considerably is the degree to which we focus on materials specifically, and even within that, materials discovery. So you can, within a lot of energy problems, for example, you could say we need to discover new battery materials, and that's true. But I think what we recognized is, to have sort of the largest possible market for our platform to have the most impact, we should look more holistically at the entire sort of product design, production, and even life cycle and disposal cycle, because manufacturing companies care about that whole process. And the thinking is we ought to be able to take data inputs at each stage of that process and help them optimize products for it at the beginning. So this I would say broadening of scope from very fundamental material science, which is where we started, maybe because our backgrounds, that's kind of our at least my research background and other people at the company, to that is but one problem among many that a Panasonic faces and expects our platform to help with.
Yeah. So Bill Barnett and Andy Radcliffe teach this awesome class at GSB called Aligning Startups with Their Markets. And they talk about a pivot. This term has started to get misused around here, that it just means you're like doing something radically different. They say a pivot is where you keep one foot in place and then you move the other foot to kind of position differently. And so the pivots we've done have been driven by customer discovery and interviewing customers and kind of finding the best place to go first. So the way that's manifested for us is actually which molecule do we make first from CO2? And when we first started, we were looking at ethanol. And we even went out and we visited ethanol plants, and we saw that kind of our process could actually have this huge cost advantage. And basically at a corn ethanol plant, for every ton of ethanol you make, you actually release a ton of CO2. And it's very pure, so we could take that CO2 and just turn it into more ethanol, increase their yield by 50%. Seemed like an awesome kind of integrated value proposition. But that was also when oil prices were still $80 a barrel. And so then when that collapsed, it kind of made us think, man, is there something else that would be a better fit that's maybe less volatile? And then we kind of hit upon, we've done probably 300, 400 customer interviews now. And we discovered this hole in the market for carbon monoxide. So you try to keep it out of your house, but it's a really important synthesis gas. And at the small end of the market, it's actually really expensive to get delivered, and there's all these restrictions on how much you can store. And it turns out we're really good at making CO, and we can make it on demand with really high safety for 10 times lower cost than what you pay today. And that came through talking to gas delivery companies, and they're actually like looking for solutions for this. And even in Europe, there's like new regulation coming out around transporting CO on the road. And so the technology, the basic technology is still the same, but really what we're focusing and going to the market with was driven by customers.
Thank you. Next question.
This is for Nick. So you realize how much CO2 is generated every year.
32 billion tons.
Well,
from energy-related emissions.
billion, yeah, more than that actually. But okay, so how is your process going to interact with the relatively low need for hydrocarbon materials, plastics or whatever, and the need to recycle more of the materials that we use, which on Mars you have to do 100% recycling. Here we're really very poor at it. So we have to clean that up. So how much of your process is actually going to make a dent in the CO2 emissions that we produce by energy generation?
Yeah, so the question was, how does our technology interact with potentially decreasing demand for hydrocarbon-based materials as well, and the increasing recycling of those materials? I would say, when you look at the clean energy future that we're going towards, there's no silver bullet, it's silver buckshot. And there's going to be a lot of ways that we're going to reduce emissions. And this technology, even just like the first few products that we're looking at, just for plastics, could offset about 1.5 billion of those 33 billion tons. So obviously there's plenty more work to do. but we see ourselves as part of a broader solution. And there's plenty of CO2 to go around, and there's still such an abysmal recycling rate that it would still make sense to do this. Like, for example, if you're making polyethylene with this process, you'd actually permanently sequester 3 tons of CO2 for every ton of ethylene that you produce. So that's pretty compelling from a CO2 mitigation standpoint. There will be other solutions as well that help bring it down.
Other questions?
Agriculture, closed loop agriculture. Say greenhouses, growing stuff, pumping CO2, taking the next, anything that you see possible in there?
For kind of like carbon farming,
Yeah.
is that a TomCat company? Christine Sue's company? Yeah, there's another TomCat company that's working on that.
So, I'm familiar with the 3 big advanced biofuel centers, one of which is J-Bay, Citrine, Wang. Have you talked to those guys at all? My understanding of those is they had the same issue you did with the price of oil going down so much, and they were all looking for ways to make products as a way to use.
So are we collaborating with other groups that are looking at doing?
Or just talking to them about what they're doing, like Jay Kiesling and people like that. Do you know that name?
Yeah, we definitely are looking broadly for collaborators and staying current in what's in the field. I think it's better to be plugged in and stay on top of the latest thinking.
And
I guess the point I was trying to link to the last question, that biofuels is a big piece of buckshot. To make those, to allow those to get into the market, this kind of technology seems ideal. And I know it's what all 3 centers are now working on, because they can't make it without a carbon price and at the current price of oil.
Right, so there's kind of renewed interest in trying to make biofuels work in some other way. I think what we're seeing, and make products instead of fuels is what you're saying. Yes, exactly. And so that's kind of the approach we're taking is let's get something that's higher margin. There's also what we're seeing in the market is actually a transition from maybe thinking about using, at least in Europe, thinking about blending with biofuels to reduce the CO2 footprint of fuels, and more doing things at the refinery level that are going to improve the CO2 emissions at refineries. So, for example, rather than making hydrogen using steam methane reforming, can you do some of that with electrolysis? We'd be a very similar application. We could kind of bolt into that and feed in lower carbon products at like chemical refinery. So there's other ways of getting at that problem too.
I just wanted to quickly add that we're talking with the J-Bay folks about using our platform to decide what molecules and what products to target that might have properties that would meet needs in industry.
The last question over here.
Could you guys comment on sort of, it's commonly referred to as the valley of death of funding, right? So it sounds like Citrine has done an okay job because you guys are software based in terms of finding investors who understand, okay, it's a piece of software and they feel really comfortable about that. It sounds more like Opus 12 is still or maybe earlier stage, right? So you're using a lot of the government grants and things like that, but what do you sort of see as your path out into broad commercialization? Or is it too early to tell?
Our approach has been, from the investor side, is to basically build investors who fit into 3 categories. One is going to be kind of more traditional financial investors, but who have more of like a visionary lens and who are willing to bet on technologies that aren't entirely software-based. Category 2 is strategics, so the venture arm at an oil and gas company, someone who's actually thinking about they would deploy this technology in addition to getting a financial return from it. And then the third group is places like family offices or groups of more permanent capital where they don't necessarily have like a fund cycle where they have to get a return in 7 years. They can see this thing all the way through, and they're actually excited about putting tons of money into deploying specific projects. So if you build a team, and that's what we're doing, you build a team to put that together, that's how we plan to get through the valley of death.
Okay, great. let's thank our speakers and thank you all for coming.